Mark Rothko, then Louise Nevelson, and finally Helen Frankenthaler. They represented a much larger group of Jewish artists, all of whom were immigrants coming from Eastern Europe and Russia. And their influence is odd given their numbers, which were disproportionately small. The fact that they came from, I got to take that screen off. Okay. Given that they came from Eastern Europe, different culture and language, given that there was no heritage really of fine arts in their homes, and yet they had a great impact and seemed to have a great affinity for the arts broadly, whether it was music, painting, poetry, design. Jews had a significant influence across the board of modernism. So we're going to look at that and why that is. What made Jews and modernism such a good match? And to begin, I thought I would, next, Jerry.
I haven't started
Oh,
yet,
yeah.
David. Do you know Jitterbug Smart?
Do I know what?
Ms. or Mr. Smart in the waiting room?
No.
Okay.
Okay, thanks. I'll text them and see who
Yep.
they are.
So Jerry, oh, there we go. So I'm going to provide a definition of modernism that I thought would be useful. It's from the Tate Museum. There are many different definitions, but I thought this was a good one, and it really fit Ben Shahn well. So yeah, Jews and American modernism. And I'm going to read from prepared text this, and then a snapshot of his career, and then that's the last that I'm going to be reading of anything, and we have a lot to cover. So I'm going to be talking pretty fast. I am a New York Jew after all, but hopefully in a way that is understandable, because I want to get through this. It's even in putting this together, it was so exciting to see how extraordinary an artist he was. Jerry, back? Okay. So modernism refers to a global movement in society and culture that from the early decades of the 20th century sought a new alignment with the experience and values of modern industrial life. Building on late 19th century precedents, artists around the world used new imagery, materials, and techniques to create artworks that they felt better reflected the realities and hopes of modern societies. And Ben Shahn fits this definition. You'll see it's very difficult to categorize him, but he was clearly one of the giants. And in his day, through the 20s, through the 30s, 40s, 50s, he was among the most important artists in America. Next. Oh, I have to learn to read the screen. So by way of a quick introduction, he was a master lithographer, which he learned when he was 15 and became a master at 19. He was a highly sought after commercial artist. He produced hundreds of posters, magazines, book covers, including 7 covers for Time magazine, which we have all of those later in the presentation, and many book and magazine illustrations. He was a muralist whose monumental frescoes, he learned that from Diego Rivera at the Jersey Homelands, the Bronx Post Office, and the Social Security Administration Office, rank among the finest murals ever produced in America. And he also did a lot of mosaic murals at synagogues, really in the 60s, right up until the point of his death, which was in 1969. Next. He was a photographer for the WPA and the Farm Security Administration. His photographs taken on trips through the South and Midwest are as distinguished and compelling as those produced by the better known Walker Evans and Dorothea Lange, with whom he worked. And Walker Evans was one of his close friends, and they worked together for years. He was a fine arts master painter whose drawings and paintings are included in major collections around the world. In 1947, he was the youngest American artist to be given a full retrospective by MoMA, and he was selected with William de Kooning to represent the United States at the Venice Biennale in 1954. And the only thing I would say is that his work was championed and always purchased well, and he was beloved. There were a couple of critics, most notably Clement Greenberg, who dismissed his work with the rise of the abstract expressionists, whose work he championed. And this connection, we're going to start with a short video about one of Shahn's paintings from the collection of the Met, called, I think it's from the collection of the Georgia Museum, called Contemporary American Sculpture, which I thought was very effective in counterpointing modern art and Ben Shahn's art. So yeah, can you run that, Jerry? Hey, Jerry? Jerry? There's no sound. Jerry, there's no sound.
We're in the Georgia Museum of Art, and we're looking at a painting by Ben Shahn called Contemporary American Sculpture. And it looks different than what I usually expect.
It's a really unique painting. It originated in 1940, inspired by the Whitney annual exhibition of that year. And Shahn here is painting a gallery that actually existed. It's a gallery of 8 sculptures that all appeared together in that annual show. But there's also something surprising happening in the background.
On the left wall, a view of what looked like tenements, and then an image of a figure who looks impoverished in front of a shack. And then 2 figures, one holding crutches. These images look like much more of what I expect of Ben Shahn paintings.
The views that you see here are actually based on photographs that Shahn made in his travels as a photographer during the Works Progress Administration. On the left, it's a West Virginia mining town. In the center, a farmer in the Ozarks in Arkansas. And on the right, 2 African-American women sitting outside a welfare hospital in New York City. They look like they could be paintings on the wall, and yet it's that doorway on the left where the tiled floor of the gallery suddenly turns into dirt and patches of grass that cues you to think that this is not an actual gallery space at all, but this mingling of these outsider figures being brought into the space of a gallery.
So many artists were involved in the WPA in the 1930s. This was an effort to employ artists during the New Deal.
Also to document contemporary American life, sending these photographers around to communities all over the country to capture a slice in time in American life and culture.
And Shahn's work is about raising our awareness of the suffering of working people. And so in this painting, I sense the tension for Shahn between 2 worlds, between the art world, which was clearly very important to him. This is where he made his living, where he had to establish his reputation, but also another world that mattered to him enormously as a social realist painter, a world where he could use his art for social good.
He's creating these visual relationships between the X form of the crutches and the X form of this abstracted bronze body that's on a pedestal, noting what does high modernist sculpture have to say about the human condition? What do these pristine bodies that are an ideal, what do those have to say about human experience and the experience of real life Americans who you see through these windows and doorways? It's this realization for him, what is the work that I'm doing in the world? What function does it serve? And reckoning with the role of the artist in society, for him being part of both the high art world, but also developing these relationships in his travels as a photographer around the country with these communities who are so distant from the spaces that he occupies as a professor. And this is this hinge moment for him when he's moving from what might be called a social realism, a realism that comments on social reality, to what he came to call a personal realism.
Great. Next. We're going to talk now about Shahn's early years, and we're really going to take it from his birth, which was in 1898, through into the 20s. So his early years, next. His father was Hessel. His mother was Giddel, which I think is Jerry's name. They lived in Kovno. His father was a radical, part of the Bund, and he was arrested in 1902, just after they moved to a smaller town called Wilkemar. Both towns were heavily Jewish, but they moved to Wilkemar. There was a big fire in the town in 1902, which Shahn remembers and finds all through his career in his paintings. And the fire destroyed their home entirely, destroyed the town, basically. It was frightening to this 4-year-old kid. The father, meanwhile, right at that point, is arrested and exiled to Siberia. Apparently, his last words to the family as he was being dragged off was, "Go to America," which they did. Apparently, Ben Shahn, as a kid, until he left, was very fond of saying to anybody that wore a uniform, "Down with the czars." So he was radicalized early on. In his growing up, in those first 8 years, he studied Hebrew, the Talmud. He was drawing from day one, it's been reported. His grandfather, he was very close to, his name was Wolf Lieb, Wolf Lion, and he appears throughout Shahn's artwork over his career, and especially his hands. Shahn drew his own hands early on, and as we'll see, his hands are one of the most remarkable aspects of his art right throughout his life. But his father's hands, his grandfather's hands, his own hands, his father and grandfather were carpenters, woodworkers, and he was very close to his grandfather. When they left in 1906, he recalls holding his grandfather's hand all the way until the carriage pulled away, and his grandfather at the last moment put a carved nutcracker in his hand. And that was the last time he saw his grandfather. So it was very painful for him to leave. He also tells one story that he recalls, again, that factors through his work, especially when he gets into the more symbolic work in the 50s and 60s. He remembers being in Hebrew school, studying the Torah, maybe it was Midrash from the Talmud, about the ark being carried between two poles and the carriers being warned that they couldn't touch the ark lest they be killed, and one, because it wobbles, turns and touches the ark and is killed. Shahn, however, he remembers this, is shocked by it as a young person, and it did cause some distance between him and Judaism. From that point of view, he was repulsed by the injustice that he saw. He couldn't imagine that this was just. And again, we'll see that theme coming through his art, this whole question of social justice. So they go to America. They Jerry, they go to America in 1906. And he loves it. He loves it from day one, it seems. He's drawing, he discovers chewing gum. He thinks it's the greatest thing that he ever experienced, and baseball, which I'm going to get to much later. But he is happy to be in America. He is thriving. Then the family suffers financial ruin. The father, Hessel, who's rejoined them, by the way, he actually got there first. He makes some terrible investments with the money they had. They're impoverished, they're moving frequently, and he has to leave school, leave his high school, and go to work as an apprentice lithographer. And he never really forgave his mother. She was the one that insisted, and it caused a real breach. That said, he learned so many valuable things in that experience. He learned lettering, line, space, the patterning of form and space. He became a master lithographer, which is actually an official title. So he was quite excellent in the job. He never liked it, but he learned a lot. And while he was practicing as a lithographer and supporting the family in part, he also goes to school. He first starts at Columbia, but he doesn't stay there. He goes to CCNY, which he could afford. He ultimately goes to the Art Student League and the National Academy of Design. And at the National Academy of Design, he takes anatomy. This is what he recalls. And once again, he becomes very good at hands. Hands, they represent to him strength, they represent fortitude, resilience, power, and sustenance, as he's described many times in his career. So next, he gets married in, I think we're out of order. Is that, let me see that. Yeah, okay. He marries Tilly in 1922. She comes from an Orthodox background. She's lovely, and they end up with 2 kids, but the marriage doesn't last. They get divorced in 1935, in part because she reminds him of a world that he's trying to distance himself from. And he could be surprisingly harsh. The 2 children that he had, Judith and Ezra, pretty much ignored them after they got divorced. And it was only later in his life that he and Judith reconciled and established more of a relationship. Next. This is a picture of Tilly that was taken in Truro, where they went for their summers. And this is a painting he did of Tilly. And their divorce was absolutely bewildering to her, and she never really recovered from it. And she died young. He ended up marrying somebody that we will get to know shortly, Bernarda Bryson, not Jewish, from Ohio, very, very different, but becomes an extraordinary partner for him and his work. Next. These are 2 paintings that he did, drawings. One in 1917, so he is 19 years old, and the other in 1919. The one on the left, the old man, maybe was his father or his grandfather. It's not clear, but even as a young man, just based on the studies he's taken at the National Academy and the Art Student League, obviously there's great talent there. The one on the right is of his brother. This is the great tragedy in his life. He loved his brother Jaime, everybody did. And in 1926, when he and his wife Tilly invited Jaime and his father Hessel up to join them in where they had their country house, Jaime died. He drowned. And particularly terribly, because Tilly and Ben both struggled. They went into the water, they pulled him out, they desperately tried to revive him. He died. Ben had never forgot it. He too appears in certain of his work, most notably during the war years, when he did a painting called Brothers, which is pretty heart-wrenching. It really reflected the fracturing of families during the war, but Jaime is the lost brother that he never got over. And And frankly, that was the end of his relationship with his mother, who never forgave him for it. Next. So he goes with Tilly in 1924. They go to Europe, and he was desperate to go. They saved up enough money, and they go to first North Africa, then they go to Europe broadly, and then they end up in Paris. And obviously in Paris, like so many of the American artists that went, he is overwhelmed. Cézanne impresses him most deeply, and you can see that in this painting. But he is just in a wonderland. He goes, he's there for about a year and a half, in Paris for about 6 months. He goes to the museums, he goes to the cafes. He is introduced either personally or by reputation to Brancusi and Modigliani and Picasso and Matisse and Gros. He recalls a scene where he's at a cafe and he finds himself sitting next to Picasso and Matisse. And he is trying desperately with his pretty good French to hear what they're saying. And he leans in very close and he hears them say, Picasso, what are you having for lunch? Matisse, I don't know, what are you having for lunch? And that's what he learned from Picasso and Matisse. But he studies the work, and this is the beginning of his developing a style, his early efforts to emulate the French modernists. That said, when they leave, and there's another one next, Jerry, this is a second one that he paints, which is also, you can see the French influence. There's a number of artists that might lay claim to their trace in this, but he finds these early efforts, it was valuable to study them and to try to copy and emulate them, but it leaves him unhappy and maladjusted, he said. He leaves unhappy and maladjusted, comes back to New York. He's in New York next, Jerry, and he gets to New York and he has an art show. It's not these paintings, it's the prior ones. He has an art show at the Jewish Art Center. He shows with Raphael Sawyer and Chaim Gross, two great Jewish American artists. And his work is reviewed. Again, he's a first-time artist on the scene, but Louis Lozowick, who was a great artist himself, writes a review. And he said, this Ben Shahn is competent in so many directions, he's hard to characterize. Shahn himself says, well, it may be art, but is it my own art? What is my art? And he's offered a show at a New York gallery and he turns it down. He says to Tilly, we're going back. We're going back to Europe. He needs to go back. He feels he needs to distance himself from the New York scene. And once again, they go to Northern Africa, Tunisia, and they go to this town in Tunisia where he does these paintings. And that town, I'm forgetting the name. Jerry, can you do the next slide? And bear these two in mind. Yeah, this is Djerba in Tunisia, where he spends almost a year. He does 200 paintings, drawings, and sketches. This is Siesta at Djerba. This is in MoMA. And Jerry, go back to the prior slide, if you can. He does this, and then he does these paintings, and they become extraordinarily important. He goes on to Paris, and once again, he does his tour of the art scene and revels in it. But when he comes home, he's changed. He's starting to find his own style, his line, his focus on his art. He goes home, next, Jerry, and next again. Well, he goes home and next. Well, actually, before we get there, he goes home and immediately walks right into the stock market crash of 1929. But he has this extraordinary good luck, which is the way life is, isn't it? He finds his way, and it's not clear how exactly, whether she found him or he found his way there, but Edith Halpert, who was one of the major gallerists in New York City, and she ran something called the Downtown Gallery. She sees his work. At first, she is very dismissive when he wanted to show it, or before she saw it. She sees his work. She sees that work that we just saw from Zerba and from what he did in France. And without any other thinking about it, offers to give him a one-person show, which is hugely important because she's tied into all of the New York art glitterati, not the least of whom is Abby Rockefeller. Abby Rockefeller comes in, sees the work, and buys back before Girl with Kimono, and ends up buying 3 other pieces, brings all of her friends in, and before you know it, Shahn has sold all of his paintings in Edith Halpert's gallery. Within the month, he is included in a show at the Whitney, at the Newark Museum, and at MoMA with all of the great artists in New York City. So he is launched by just sort of a quirk of fate that nobody can actually remember how exactly he got to Edith Halpert. Next slide. Stay with this one. Sorry, Gary. So that summer, after this great success, back again, Jerry, back again, yeah. So this summer, the summer of 1931, after his success in New York, he goes to Truro, which is right off the tip of Cape Cod. And they stay for the summer. Who is his guest? His best buddy, Walker Evans, who becomes one of the great American photographers, as most of you probably know. And he stays for the summer. They set up together in a studio, Walker Evans doing his photography and Ben doing his painting. And Ben asked him one time, he's having so much difficulty keeping track of his notes that he complains about it. And Walker Evans says, well, why don't you take pictures? You don't have to keep notes, take pictures, and that is your record. And Ben basically has an old Leica, and he says, well, okay, but how do I do it? And Walker Evans says, well, Ben, it's very easy. F4.5 when you're in the sun, or F9 on the sunny side, F4.5 when you're on the shady side, and hold it for a 20th second, and you're done. That was the only lesson that Ben ever had. He becomes one of America's great photographers, which I didn't realize at all. And then saw that so much of the work that we see as Depression era, WPA, with Walker Evans, with Dorothea Lange, and with Ben Shahn. So he shares this house. Walker Evans is doing his photography, and Ben starts on what becomes his epical work that all starts in Truro. Next. The first thing he works on is a Haggadah, which ends up being 12 plates illustrated by him. It's now in the Jewish Museum. It's extraordinary. And towards the end of his life, he does another series of paintings and the lettering, which, from his lithographer days and from his Jewish feelings, lettering, as we'll see later, is incredibly important. It's it's powerful, potent, it's sacred. So he does the Haggadah, which is really a great work for his, but he doesn't stop there. Next. He also continues some of his still French Impressionist work. This was sold. It was an important piece for him, but it clearly is the last of its kind in terms of the French influence. Next. Most significantly, he reads a story about in 1930, 31, he reads about Captain Alfred Dreyfus, who was convicted of treason in 1894, a classic case and a celebrated case of anti-Semitism. This is the one where when he's convicted, Émile Zola, the next day, bold headlines in the largest newspaper in Paris, says, "J'accuse," accuses the government of anti-Semitism. He was framed. There was no evidence. It was a report by some French spy in Germany that thought he saw something with Dreyfus's signature on it. Notwithstanding all of that, he's exiled to Devil's Island. It is demonstrated that it was false, that the evidence was not there. He's tried again and he's court-martialed again, but this time for 10 years. And 6 years into it, he's finally released, and then he's given the Legion of Honor. Meanwhile, Ben Shahn sees this and says, this is my chance. This is the beginning of his social realism, acting against injustice. And he does 12 plates of everybody involved in the trial. This is of Dreyfus. This is of the judge and the prosecutor, and he has 11 more of these. The importance of this, Jerry, next, is that he sort of finds himself on the side now of social justice. And while this case was very celebrated, and he goes back to New York with these 13, and they all sell at Edith Halpert's gallery. But before he goes, he defines what changes his life completely, and by which he is really launched. Oh, one thing I wanted to say about his buddy, Walker Evans, and I just thought it was hilarious. Walker Evans says, spending the summer with Ben was overwhelming. He found Ben overpowering, and he said all he had to do was come into the room and you felt immediately tired. That's what he said about Ben Shahn. So Ben Shahn, while he is in France years ago, finds this story. It's all around him, because in 1921, Bartolomeo Vanzetti and Nicola Sacco are tried and convicted for murdering a pay clerk in Braintree, Massachusetts. The evidence, again, is circumstantial. The fingerprints don't match. There is so much wrong with this case. And there are literally riots, 20,000 people gathering all over the world, not just in America, but all over the world, protesting this conviction of these two Italian-American anarchists. And anarchists they were. Next. So Ben does 20, while he's there in Truro, and I think it continues after he leaves, I forget, but he does 23 gouaches, which is a form of watercolor, of everything about the trial. And the painting on the left, which, as you can see, is much bigger than you might imagine here. You see him looking at the study for it that he's done. Okay, so it's worth noting, there's Sacco and Vanzetti in the coffins. In the background is the judge who has convicted him, who's very, very biased against Italian-American anarchists. He denies the appeals after he's found guilty. The Massachusetts Supreme Court denies the appeal. The governor, because there's so much of an uproar, the governor forms this committee of 3, and the committee is comprised of the president of Harvard, the president of MIT, and some venerable guy in Massachusetts, and they uphold the decision. And they are executed. The electric chair in 1927. And Ben Shahn feels like he has found his moment. And in fact, he has. He says in his notes that, he was looking he wished he could be at the crucifixion. That really would have been something to cover. He's found his crucifixion. And Peter Bentley and Felix Frankfurter, who's then a professor at Harvard and soon to be a Supreme Court justice, writes a book about this and about the injustice of it. Peter Benchley, who is one of the Algonquin Roundtable folks with Dorothy Parker and others, inscribes Frankfurter's book as a gift to Ben. And he says, to Ben Shahn, without whom this crime would never have been committed. And actually, without this crime having been committed, may not have had the career that he had. Next. So Ben now is, he's back from Truro, and he is approached by Diego Rivera, who loves the Sacco and Vanzetti work that he saw. And he has been commissioned to do a mural for the Rockefellers at 30 Rock in the lobby. And the mural is to be called Man at the Crossroads, Looking with Hope and High Vision to the Choosing of a New and Better Future. Quite a title. Of course, Diego Rivera is very excited. Apparently, both Picasso and Matisse were offered this commission and turned it down. So Rivera goes to work and he asked Ben Shahn to help him. He is his principal assistant, although with Diego Rivera, that meant basically carrying paint around and preparing paints and his brushes. But nevertheless, Ben learns the art of frescoes, which is incredibly important because he is about to become the greatest muralist in America. And they do this, this fantastic mural, which is 45 by 15. They finish it, and somebody asks, who's that under the propeller to the right? And well, it's Lenin. And all of a sudden there's certain, communist workers in there. And one of the trustees of the Rockefellers, is shocked, goes to Nelson, who is the great promoter of this. And Nelson writes to Rivera and says, yeah, can you do something about it? We can't have Lenin in there. Apparently they found out it was Lenin because somebody asked Ben Shahn, is that Trotsky over there? And Ben Shahn says, no, it's Vladimir Lenin. So Rivera comes back and says, well, I'm not taking him out, but I'll put Lincoln in across from him on the other side of the propeller. No, that's not the answer. He refuses to give in, and he says it has to be destroyed. It cannot be shown. So it's covered with canvas for 3 weeks, and 3 weeks later, with protests outside led by Ben Shahn, it's destroyed. It's jackhammered into the dust of history, so it doesn't exist. And that's Diego Rivera insisting that his socialist hero be in the mural. Next. Now Ben Shahn is out of work again, but he's hired by the WPA and the Farm Security Administration at the behest of Walker Evans. It's 1935. He goes on a trip with this woman, Bernarda Bryson, who he meets, introduced to him while he's doing the mural with Diego Rivera. They travel through the South. These are just some of the photographs they took, all of which are familiar, have appeared in Family of Man and other places. And these are in Arkansas and Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee. Next. He makes 2 trips to the South. I won't show pictures from the second, but they're a year apart. The more important fact of the second one is that he's just been commissioned, as we're going to get to do the Jersey Homelands mural, but the FSA wants him to go south again with his camera, and he does. And he makes one more trip in 1938, again for the Farm Security Administration, to Ohio. And Ohio is not in quite the desperate straits that The South was, he in fact finds it difficult to find subjects, but then he realizes, and this is a huge turning point for him, he realizes that he is moved from social realism to personal realism, that he is finding the humanity in people. He's less involved in the larger social issue. He's more involved in the humanity of the people. And that is a turning point because he decides there in 1938, he's not taking pictures ever again. And he never does, except for his own pleasure, because he finds instead that he now is going to practice a social art. He finds a larger potentiality in art and capturing individual humanity. So that's the end of his art, but he's still working for the FSA. And next, they now have him doing posters, and this on 1937 is a poster that he did based on a photograph he did 2 years earlier. And while he's no longer taking pictures, he's using many of the photos that he took for his posters, for paintings, and for his murals. Next. And this is one of his more famous posters called Years of Dust that he did for the Resettlement Administration, rescuing victims of the Depression, restoring land to proper use, which was the whole theme of the Farm Resettlement Administration. Next. Now we come to really his greatest mural, and we all have the great benefit of living near Roosevelt, New Jersey, which is where he ultimately settled. He went in the next year. He is commissioned to do a mural by the FSA, a 3-phase mural to show the Jewish immigration, unionization, and the prosperity of this utopian opportunity. And this is in what became Roosevelt, 1,250 acres that the government allocates to set up a new land for the garment workers of New York City to come and resettle. They're going to build, they're going to create a farm, they're going to build a factory, and 200 homes are created. And it is really worth a trip, as I've made several times, to see not only this mural, which is in the public school, but the homes, 200 homes, all designed by Louis Kahn, a famous architect who worked for Kastner. And it was a beautiful thing. The problem was it failed. The factory failed, the farm failed, the homes were sold. A lot of the people that were there bought them. They were $500 a shot, but a lot of other people came in. So this utopian idea didn't survive. But the beginning years of it were extraordinary, and it was virtually all Yiddish-speaking Jewish union workers from New York. This mural is in three different sections, and it's fascinating. Next, Jerry. The first section, you have the immigration. In the top corner, there's a sign with a Nazi holding it that we don't buy from Jews. There are 2 men in coffins, which represent the pogroms and the Holocaust with weeping women, although a lot of people have noted that they look very much like Sacco and Vanzetti. Below it is Ellis Island going through immigration, and here they come off the boat, led by Einstein, by Gittel, Ben's mother, and Raphael Sawyer next to her. And here they come. The middle, in the middle is unionization is the theme. In the top left, this is from the Triangle Shirt Factory fire that killed 146 women. It was an extraordinary tragedy and really gave rise to many of the labor laws that were instituted. The labor leader on the in the middle is forgetting his name, It's not clear who it was, but it writes, he's talking about the great benefits of labor. And these are all the workers that are trying to decide if it's really going to benefit them. The third slide, Jerry, is here the union workers are in school, the people in the community are getting an education, there's building of the factory, people are working, and on the right, all the creatives, including Castor and Louis Kahn, are designing the community, which, you know, they have in the background. You can see the factory with the hills behind it. Of course, there are no hills, sort of a monumental picture, but this is the mural that is championing what is going to be a new world. Next. So Shahn finishes this mural. He's approached to do 2 more murals, one on the penal institution to be at Sing Sing, and the next to be an anti-prohibition, which has just been repealed. He goes through the process of creating all of the panels for it as maquettes, gets the commission on both of them, and in the end, doesn't get to do it. As far as prohibition, the government decides it's too embarrassing to do a mural on how stupid they were. And as far as the penal institution, there were too many people that really didn't think it belonged in a prison. But he does get a major assignment, the meaning of Social Security, and it is really worth mentioning there are 375 people that apply for this. This is incredibly valuable to all of these out-of-work painters. They're paid a good salary while they're working. It might be 2 years of work. Shahn wins the assignment over 375 applicants, which gives you an idea of how extraordinary he was and his stature. This is one of the frames of it. I don't think we have any others, but it was called The Meaning of Social Security. Next, Jerry. Oh yeah, these are some other slides. So you can see they are working. Others that need Social Security are crippled, abandoned, desperate straits. The bottom left, the same, crippled and caring for children. And then last on the right, celebrating the work and the ability to provide for the underprivileged and abandoned and crippled that the Social Security is going to provide. That's another major mural, over 40 feet long, 15 feet high. And it's still there, and it's a celebrated mural. He does one more mural, next, Jerry. And this is fascinating. This is a mural in the Bronx post office. Again, massive. And there in the middle, next slide, we'll get a close-up, is this is Walt Whitman. And he is pointing to a passage from one of his poems, although many have commented that it's Walt Whitman who looks like Karl Marx, which, you know, probably could have been the model. And the controversy is that the original poem, and I won't recite all of it, but enough for you to get the idea, is called Brain of the New World. Brain of the New World, to formulate the modern, art of thyself comprising science, to recast poems, recast churches and art, recast, maybe discard them. Maybe their work is done, who knows? That's what he was going to put there. The churches go berserk. People are protesting and marching in front of the Bronx courthouse. And Ben is asked to try another poem. At first he resists, but then he agrees. And he chooses another poem, which is accepted again in a few short strokes. It's from his poem, Whitman's poem, and I'm a big Whitman fan. from his poem, "As I walk these broad, majestic days." And it says, "We support all, fuse all. After the rest is done and gone, we remain. There is no final reliance but upon us. Democracy finally rests upon us, and our visions sweep through eternity." Potent then and certainly meaningful for us now. The mural is done and again celebrated as one of the great murals in America. And there were murals all over post offices across the country. This is certainly one of the greatest. Next. So Ben is now, it's 1939, all of his murals are done, and he is basically out of work again, and he's now painting for himself. And this launches what becomes this golden period of Ben Shahn's art. He has a burst of painting. These are a couple. This is called 1939 Self-Portrait Among Churchgoers. What's noteworthy about this is he is there taking a picture on the left, but he's looking that way, but he had this special lens that was at a right angle of the camera. So people never knew he was taking pictures of them, or they might not have let him, or they would have started posing. But it's among churchgoers. This is after he's had this experience with the church protesting his Whitman poem. So he's this is kind of sarcastic. Next. This is one of his outstanding images. This is at MoMA, a celebrated piece there in New York City, simply called Handball. But it shows both the social connection and community, but also, strangely, a little bit of the isolation. The space in this is, I find amazing and beautiful. Next. Okay, and this is one more that he did. This is 1940, the Willis Avenue Bridge. People would always ask him, what is the meaning of this? And especially when you see the photograph that he did, and then the way he treated it on the bridge with these bold orange cross beams. He said there was really no meaning to this. He walked the bridge every day and he would always pass these two women sitting in the same place, and he put them in this picture. It's become one of his iconic images. Next. So the 40s are the war years, and again, an amazing period where there's a big adjustment in his art, as it was for many artists. Next. He's still working for the government. Now he's working for the Office of War Information. He's hired with other artists, although he's almost uniquely a fine artist and a commercial artist. And some held it against him that he did commercial art. How can you be a fine artist and a commercial artist? These are two of the posters that he did that were accepted. Most of the ones he did, he was either too anti-war or he was too brutal. It was one or the other. This one is, "We French workers warn you, defeat means slavery, starvation, and death." And in 1943, "This is what Nazi brutality looks like." That's both at MoMA. And these are, if you can read it, it's all men of Ludus, which is in Czechoslovakia, have been shot, the women deported to a concentration camp, the children sent to appropriate centers. The name of the village was immediately abolished. And these are horrifying images. The purpose of these was to rally Americans on the side of the war and accept the restrictions that they were dealing with. That was why they were doing these posters. He did dozens. These are the only two that saw the light of day. Next. Then come this series of paintings that are pretty brutal. And he went to Europe. He saw close at hand briefly the destruction. He called this Europa, which he used to generalize the destruction across Europe. They were all tempera on board. You can see the rubble in front of this shell of a building. Next. This is, I love this painting. It's one of my favorites. It's called The Red Stairway. You see the rubble on the left and the stairway. It's like a Di Chirico painting where this crippled man is going up the stairs. There is this blotch of red, which is the red stairway, and he goes down. It's hope, and then it's despair. And the figure on the right, I'm not exactly sure. Some commentators have said that it represents some hopefulness because it looks like the dawn directly in front of him, but it's a pretty shocking painting. I'm sure I've never seen it. It's in St. Louis, but it's very powerful, and it shows this balance he's feeling of hope and despair. Next. This also is crazy. This is called Liberation, done in 1945 at Liberation. And you have these children swinging from this maypole, but there's something frightening about it. It's very uneasy to look at this. And the backdrop, of course, is the rubble and the burned out building. And again, it's hopeful, it's exciting, it's liberation, but it's against the backdrop of destruction. And Ben Shahn can only feel an apprehension, which he's always lived with, which goes back to when the town of Wilkemar was burned to the ground. Next. This is the first of two paintings that I have this is kind of humorous. This is done in 46. It's called Renaissance or Renaissance or Renaissance. Not sure which. And I would just point out, as has been humorously noted, that it represents people think of, and now he's into his symbolism period. The statue, the classic statue to the right, some have found closely looking like a phallus. And the growth on the left is fertility, and the woman is looking at the statue, and there you go. Again, another celebrated image. I don't know if people all know what's been imagined for it. Next. This is Father and Child, again, 1946. And this is the aftermath of the war, homes and families destroyed, still dispossessed, with their longings, looking for a home, looking perhaps for the home they once had that they've been dispossessed of. Interestingly, Shahn does not do much that's specifically Holocaust related. We will see a couple of examples, but it's all sort of implicit in his work. Next. This is a second sort of hopeful one. And this again is a very celebrated image. And in fact, the Jewish Museum, in a retrospective they did, and its catalog in 1998, this was the cover. It's a magnificent catalog, by the way, and it's simply called Spring. And it's this couple in love with the two kids in the background on the walk jumping rope, but very beautiful, very powerful image and representing Shahn's hope for the future. Next. He then goes to work in 1946. He's still doing his own art, but he's also a very sought after commercial artist still. And he's hired by the CIO to do a series of posters for them. This is one of them. For all these rights we've just begun to fight. Next. So in 1948, this again becomes major for him. He is hired by Harper's Magazine, whose editor, Russell Lynes, loves Shahn, is a huge fan, and in fact says about Shahn, his simple, jagged, incisive line could draw blood, but it could also draw tears. And he hires Shahn to do this series, this article about what was known and notorious called the Hickman murder. And Hickman was a Black sharecropper who moves to Chicago. He's a religious man. He lives in a absolutely down and out tenement He has 7 children. The landlord, who by the way is Black, which I didn't realize until I read more and more about it, forces him to leave, says he's going to, rebuild the place and he's got to get out. And he says to him, I can't leave. I've got my children. I need to provide for them. And the landlord says, well, then I'm going to burn the building down. And in fact, the building burns to the ground. Hickman loses 4 of his children, and he takes a gun and kills the landlord and is arrested for murder. He is tried. He is not convicted of murder, but of manslaughter, given 2 years probation. There's a huge movement around it, not least occasioned by the article and by Shahn's drawings, of which these are only 3. And if you see the children lying, the third on the right, this is almost exactly, I didn't show it here, it's pretty horrifying, but exactly a picture from the Holocaust of I don't even know how to say this, a pile or an assemblage of dead children. It's almost exactly the same image. Next. He is then hired by Harper's, again, by the editor, to do another extraordinary circumstance, which is the mining disaster that took place in Illinois, where 111 miners were killed. He and the country are shocked by it. Lyons hires a writer to do the story and hires Shahn to do the drawings. He does 17 of them, all of which he subsequently converts to paintings. And some of the paintings appear in the magazine. And I found a fantastic video from the museum, which Jerry will play. It's only 5 minutes long, but it, I think, really honors this work in particular, which is some of Shahn's finest.
It happened an hour ago, way down in this tunnel of coal. The gas caught fire from somebody's lamp, and the miners are cooking in smoke.
We're in the Philadelphia Museum of Art in painting storage, and we've pulled out a rack with a large painting by Shahn, and it depicts a mine disaster that killed 111 miners.
It's showing the aftermath of this horrible disaster. Through a doorway, we see 2 men in suits with slightly stooped shoulders walking back towards the mine building. But in the foreground, we have a woman, her hands clasped, her head covered, looking with a bleak look on her face like, what is to be done? And it seems clear that the 2 figures have just delivered the news that her husband, a miner, was killed in this tragedy.
So she's now a widow. And to the left side of the painting, we see 2 smaller figures, an older woman and a child, presumably her child and perhaps her mother. But this woman on the right, the largest figure, is still by herself. Those eyes have no pupils. We see instead these large black circles. And there's an emphasis on the inner corners of the eye, which makes it seem as if she's been up all night waiting for word.
The eyes are so dark, and while they're pointing straight ahead, it's as though she were gazing into space, lost in her own thoughts.
But because she looks at us as a viewer standing before this painting, I feel implicated in this tragedy, in her suffering.
The figures are walking away. She's been left alone, and yet the older woman and the child are now her responsibility.
The artist Shahn is often referred to as a social realist, an American artist interested in revealing social problems of his own era. The United States has a long history of confronting issues of industrial safety. There is this history of tragedy being followed by reform.
while inspired by this mining disaster, he's trying to touch upon this bigger social issue by focusing on the personal impact that the lack of oversight, the lack of mine regulation, the loss of life is having on what feels like a very real individual.
He's not showing the mine explosion.
It's the impact, what's left after that disaster. That's also signified by the clothes that are hanging in the upper left-hand corner. These miners would be coming from the mines covered with coal dust, hang up their clothes and put on clean clothes so that that mine dust wouldn't be polluting their homes. Ironically, it is that buildup of coal dust within the mine that wasn't addressed properly that led to the catastrophe. That hanging clothing signifies both the absence of the miner who's been killed and the cause of the explosion itself.
Look at the way that the artist has handled this painting. The brick wall that takes up 2/3 of the surface, and then the floor are so flat. They're absolutely abstract. But Shahn has decided to render every single brick individually.
Like hand making bricks or hand setting bricks into a wall.
It's a kind of labor. And there's also real abstraction to the human figures. This is not naturalistic painting, even though it is figurative.
It's a very flat plane of modulated color, which is then turned into the body of the woman or suggests the fabric of her clothing by these very inky, dark, heavy lines.
This woman is monumental. She's almost life-size, where the older woman and the child are at a medium scale, and then the two male figures are quite tiny in comparison, emphasizing a sense of isolation. Reports had been written repeatedly and recently about the dangers in this mine, but the company that was in control of the mine chose not to address them, presumably because it was too expensive. What we're seeing here is the very real human cost of industrialization, made tangible through the emotions of this woman's face and her hands.
Which are so emotional on the one hand, but so restrained. She's not wailing, she's not sobbing. It's a contained anguish.
And I see that in her eyes, but also in the firmness with which her mouth is set. It's as if she had anticipated this danger all her life, and here her greatest fear has come to pass.
Which is, I think, a condition that people associated with mines had to live with. It was dangerous work, and people went into this business knowing that there was some risk.
This is a painting that was made in 1948, and yet we're still grappling with these same issues, finding the right balance between efficiency, cost, and safety. And this painting reminds us of the impact on human life when we get it wrong.
Goodbye to Sticky and Honey. Goodbye to the wife.
Next. Next. These are some other images, all of which is this is in MoMA with several others. And they were all sold in a show at Edith Halpert's gallery, the downtown gallery. Next. For the 1950s, and I know this is getting, I'm gonna speed it up a little bit. 1950s, he continues along this line of allegory and symbolism. Allegory, again, I use the definition, an extended metaphor, usually in the form of a narrative portraying abstract ideas in symbolic guise. And this really characterizes this decade's worth of work by Shahn, as we'll see next. This first painting is called Allegory and done in 1948. It's like Shahn's worst fears realized. It is a lion wolf relating back perhaps to his grandfather on fire, which is a constant theme with this, again, assemblage, which again resembles that Holocaust picture of the bodies tumbled together. Allegory of his fear of the future coming from where we are. This is fraught with peril. Next. This is the second allegory. The fire is still there. You don't see the wolf lion head. If you look closely, you see a hand and a finger pointing to the man on his back, dressed in black with one upraised arm. And again, somewhat terrifying. Is that God? Is that judgment? Is that fate? Is that something, again, to be apprehended and feared? It's certainly not a happy painting. but it's clearly allegorical, and all of his past is perhaps wrapped up. Let's go to the next, which is the third allegory. This is extraordinary. And he called them allegory, second allegory, third allegory. This is in the Vatican Museum. Here you do see the sort of the lion wolf who is wrapped in a blanket that looks like a religious blanket that may be covering the ark. And the ark, remember, refers in Shahn's mind to the story he heard when he was still in Wilcomon about the man who touched the ark lest it fall and died. Here is the tablets behind, and here is a man blowing the shofar, which is both ritual at the High Holy Days, but it also may be sounding the alarm. We don't know. It's allegory. It's symbolic, but it's a powerful piece that's right now in the Vatican Museum. Next. He goes to Black Mountain in 1950, and he spends 4 weeks there. Next. And it's sort of a rocky 4 weeks. He is he's the professor of painting there. Black Mountain, for those of you that don't know, was an avant-garde college featuring the arts in a rather unrestrained way. It was run by Joseph Albers, who was an artist from the Bauhaus in Germany before Hitler came to power. That's where Kandinsky was, and Gropius. And so Joseph Albers is running this school called Black Mountain. Ben is invited to be the professor of painting. And what happens to him in those 4 weeks, that's all he's there, is a whole reappraisal of his own work, self-doubt, questioning, introspection. And he does 2 paintings there before he's replaced. And by the way, he's replaced by Robert Motherwell, one of the classic abstract expressionists who hates Ben Shahn, and Ben Shahn hates him. And Motherwell calls him that communist painter. And he says communist painter because Ben Shahn is being investigated, which continues right until 1957, which also contributes to his feeling fraught all the time because he's accused of being a communist and being pressured to confess and finger other people. And here's Motherwell, who, by the way, was married also to Helen Frankenthaler before Clement Greenberg was. We'll get to Helen later. But anyway, he replaces Shahn. Shahn does these 2 paintings. This is the first, and it's called Epic. And here you see 2 professional cyclists. They are professional because of their pants and their uniforms and their caps, but they look pretty sinister and maybe suspicious. Maybe this is part of McCarthyism. One's holding yes, one's holding no. And here is Ben, here is we, here is the, the human who's really only human in his fright, but he's balanced on these 2. Very powerful painting from his Black Mountain period. Next. This is the second great work that he did, highly symbolic. This is called Composition for Clarinets and Tin Horn. Tortured hands that you can see behind the clarinets. This is like a playful array of black clarinets that all could be on fire. There seems to be fire all around it. And the clown that's on one of the clarinets, it's sort of playing hide and seek, and we don't even see the person whose hands are there. Again, very, very symbolic painting. Next. So 1954, Shahn is painting. He's left Black Mountain. He was there just for a short period of time. He's now in Roosevelt painting, and he does this painting of Maimonides. And he is now, as his wife Bernarda said, becoming more and more Jewish again, Jewish themes, Jewish lettering, Jewish aphorisms. This is Maimonides, the great Jewish theologian, and he has his saying, teach thy tongue to say, I do not know, and thou shalt progress. And I think he is obviously horrified by what he's seeing, especially again, the McCarthy hearings where, you know, everybody knows with certainty who's a traitor and who's, you know, all the red baiting. So it's very, very controversial time, sort of like the time we're in now, where everybody is certain of something other than what the other guy's certain of. Next. He then is invited, and this is pretty significant. He's invited to go to Harvard in the middle of the red baiting and the blacklisting. McGeorge Bundy asks him to serve as the professor of poetry at Harvard. Poetry, well, poetry that they mean is all poetic expression in language, music, or the fine arts. And he is following in that appointment in the footsteps of E.E. Cummings, Robert Frost, T.S. Eliot, Thornton Wilder, and Igor Stravinsky. Pretty good company. And it's while he's there that he is obligated to deliver 6 lectures. They're collected in a book called The Shape of Content, which is really magnificent. These are beautiful lectures, one of which is called The Biography of a Painting, and they are well worth reading. I have an old copy of it, but pretty extraordinary. So he has a wonderful time there. He also, during this time, writes the alphabet of creation. And this is, for him, incredibly important. It's his adaptation of an ancient legend from the Zohar, which is the chief text of the Kabbalah, telling of God's creation of the world through letters and how that resonated with Ben Shahn, for whom letters, beginning in the days where he was a lithographer, are hugely important. And obviously, as part of his Jewish training and upbringing, he recognizes and believes in their potency as sacred symbols. Next. 1960s, the most important thing here, he is still doing illustrations, commercial art, magazine covers, which we'll show, but he is given the assignment once again by Harper's to do The Voyage of the Lucky Dragon. And this is hugely controversial. I think I'm saying hugely too much, I apologize, but very controversial. There are demonstrations all around the world because this is next when the US is conducting hydrogen bomb tests at Bikini Atoll, and 85 miles from the blast, a Japanese fishing boat with 85 aboard is covered with this radioactive dust. They're all sick. One, the most esteemed member of the crew, dies of radioactive poisoning, and Harper's does the story on this, Russell Lyons, and he says, and Shahn says actually, the real symbol, the dragon, is the ineffable, the unspeakable tragedy towards which the world is moving. And his wife said that Ben thought this was a consummation of everything he'd ever done. And when the paintings that came out of this were shown at the downtown gallery, the New York Times simply said, the old master is masterful again. And I just go to the next slide, Jerry. The one on the right, the one on the left are these doves, but that is the radioactive dust. So ironic, the image he uses. And then the one on the right is the sick fisherman who's close to death, sitting on the edge of the bed with this sign. And I'm going to read it because it is very moving. It's written as a poem. I am a fisherman, Aichi Kubayama, by name, on the 1st of March, 1954, Our fishing boat, the Lucky Dragon, wandered under an atomic cloud, 80 miles from Bikini. I and my friends were burned. We did not know what happened to us. On September 23rd of that year, I died of atomic burn. And that was his wife previously looking at this painting. Next. And this is farewell with all of the hands. Farewell to that sailor. And again, all symbolism. Next. These he also does really from the late 40s right to the end of his life. And I thought it was worth looking at that Sergeant Shriver. That is Adlai Stevenson. That's Lenin. That's Martin Luther King. That's Andre Malraux. These are all Time cover pictures that he did. And these are all the other Fortune magazine. And of course, he did Harper's and he did books. He did all of Saul Bellows' books. This is him as a commercial artist. And obviously, he's extraordinary. Next. And one more Time cover, Johann Sebastian Bach, 1968. Next. So towards the end of his life, it's 1966, he does this monumental alphabet. Who said that he was not an abstract artist? But these are letters, again, in which he finds the language of creation and the world. And one of his last assignments, he illustrates Rainer Maria Rilke's book of poetry, The Possibility of Being. All of the prints, and he does about 17 of them, are all based on a single line or a single verse for the sake of a single verse from the Rilke portfolio. Next. This is one of his mosaic murals, and this is at Mira Nakashima's studio, so it's right in our backyard. It's extraordinary. I saw it years ago and didn't really know what to make of it. And even after doing this program, I looked at it and I wondered if this is just a total abstraction. Is this letters? Are these words? What is this? And so I went to Mira's and she said, the title of this is The Poet's Beard. I still haven't seen the poet, but this apparently is his beard, and it's all in minute, beautiful mosaic. And unbeknownst to me, and I've known Mira a long time, Ben Shahn's work is all through all 5 or 6 buildings at the studio and at her home and her brother's home and everywhere, that Ben Shahn and Nakashima were best friends. They loved each other. And I thought to myself, I didn't ask Mira, but I thought it must be because he's a woodworker. Ben Shahn came from woodworkers, and he also loved calligraphy. George Nakashima did, as did Shahn, and lettering. There's so much that resonated between them, and they would trade each other's work. But it's the property is full of Ben Shahn's work. Next. Including this image, which they used, Mira used as their logo. And this is the Shahn hand. And again, he has a lot of his work there. And for years, that was the principal place where his work was sold. They set up a gallery for Ben Shahn's work at the Museum Minger in New Hope. And now that we know it's so close to us, it would be worthwhile, however much one could see there of Ben Shahn's work, but it's everywhere. Next. This is Shahn's family. They are there in Roosevelt, Susanna, Jonathan, and Abigail. Jonathan in the middle becomes a very talented, extraordinary sculptor who very, very sadly died a year ago that I just learned. In the gallery, Nakashima has, Mira has a bust that he did of George. And So but he didn't have the greatest relationship with his children, I think in part because of his obsession with his work, but that is a family portrait. And Bernarda next. This is Ben in his workshop. You know, it's a cute story that it makes me think of. Ben's best friend in Roosevelt Friends were Edwin and Louise Roskam. And I had the great pleasure of meeting with Annie and her husband. They're still in Roosevelt, and they are two fine artists. And it is remembered, I don't know where I read this, I don't think Annie told me, but she remembers apparently Ben inviting her to rearrange the library in his studio. And he tore off a piece of paper to give to her to do a portrait of him, which I thought was delightful. Next. This is Bernarda, who we should note was a great artist in her own right. And these are three things that she did. All of them are in Mira's house. In her bedroom is the one on the right, this extraordinary piece. Below her is a piece that she did of a person in the rocks. And to the left is a poster that the Resettlement Administration did that she did, not Ben Shahn, called A Mule and a Plow. And it became the cover. I don't know if this was the cover. I think it might have been of Steinbeck's book, Grapes of Wrath. Or it may have been another, but anyway, she was extraordinary in her own right. Next, as I'm way over time. This is their house in Roosevelt. There's a little extension to the left that accommodated his son, Jonathan, and his wife. The second story was added by and designed by Nakashima. And it's there in Roosevelt. And Roosevelt, again, is a place well worth visiting. One more slide. This is owned by myself. He did it in 1968, very close to the end of his life, called Baseball. As I said at the beginning, Ben Shahn, when he came to America, the things he loved the most were chewing gum and baseball. It was a lifelong love of his. And this is a picture of the hitter, the catcher, and the umpire behind him, almost all of a piece that is extraordinary. And I want to just end with something that Edwin Roskam had to say about him that I'm going to read. I'm going to boil it down because it gives the picture of Ben Shahn, who all knew could be immensely arrogant, self-centered, irritating. As Edwin said, he could also be kind, helpful, brilliant, stimulating. And his friends accepted this. They didn't need to forgive him anything. So they said, no matter how angry they might be. Here's what he says. It was all made right on the day, which came every once in a while, when he phoned and his voice was tense with a peculiar excitement. And he said, come on over. I've got something to show you. And you go to his house and the door to the studio stood open. And there was his latest work, still wet, propped up, and he beside it, uncertain and hopeful as a child. Here was a new picture, a newborn thing that had not existed before, and you didn't know what to say. You were speechless before it. This has been a view of Ben Shahn and his life. Very happy everybody could join in. I don't know if we have time for questions, but I'm happy to take them if we do. Thank you. Sorry for the rapid trip through time.
Okay. I just have a quick question. I'm sorry I had to tune in late. This was a fascinating lecture. This is Sherry Spiesel speaking. Will this be recorded so that I can see it again?
Yes, I think it's being.
I have a separate set of keys. Yeah.
This will be recorded, and if you look on the Kehilat
You have
Hanahar
a set of
website,
keys? What do you mean?
I mean, I have
hold on.
keys that are here. I'm assuming your other keys are either on.
So I just, David, if you could unmute yourself again. The Bagel U recordings can be found on our website, so it'll probably take a few days, but this will be on our website. Jerry or Abraham, is there anywhere else to explain how to get there?
I'll find it.
Yes, if you go to adult education on the website and scroll down to the events, you'll see the current and then past events, and it'll be under past events.
Thank you. And I just want to say, I have a very good friend who grew up in Roosevelt. She grew up with the children, and she often used to mention the Shahn family. She's in Florida now, but I'm going to try to send her the link. I'm sure she will love to see this. It's excellent. Thank you.
Thanks. Everybody stupefied?
What is the title of the link so we can receive that? I also know someone in Florida whose family grew up in Roosevelt.
Hello, David, this is your brother.
Ah, hey, Rob. But I think we have to answer the question.
I think it'll be the.
Oh, I didn't hear the.
It'll probably be the title of this today's topic.
Yeah, Jews and American modernism, probably.
Oh, okay. Just send that entire link again. All right, thank you.
Okay, brother Rob.
You beat me to it. Ha ha, now I'm getting in there first. David, that was fantastic.
Wow.
Well, spoken like a true sister.
No, I mean it very objectively. Really, I learned so much. It was great. Thank you.
Thanks, Lee.
So, David, when did you learn so much about Ben Shahn? I talked to you 2 days ago. You didn't know anything.
Osmosis, baby. I slept on books.
Wow. You became an expert, and it was beautifully presented. You did a great job.
Thank you.
Hugely fantastic.
I want to add that you've really created a whole new understanding for me. And I have a fine arts degree. And actually in my freshman year at the institution that's called the University of the Arts, Susie was a member of my early class, and then she disappeared. I don't know what happened. But I even had one professor who was negative about Shahn, saying he's evolved into an illustrator. He was kind of looking down, but you've really recast everything for me, and for which I am grateful.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, me too, actually.
Fantastic. I learned more about Ben Shahn today than my whole life. Fabulous. Thank you.
It's great. Thanks.
Wonderful lecture. Just terrific.
Please come back, everyone, for the next 2 weeks where David will continue.
Yeah, Mark Rothko next week. I'm going to line my bed with his books now.
Yasha Koach, David. So beautiful. And thank you so much, Jerry, for all the work you did behind the scenes.
Right. And I also a shout out to Sharon Smith, who did an incredible job of putting these slides together. Really amazing work. So thanks, Sharon.
Wow, well done.
Thank you so much. Wonderful.
All right.
We sought happiness and we found it.
Good.
Seeking happiness. We got it.
Just a reminder, if anyone wants to know more about our Bagel U program or more about KHN, you can look on the website, or also reach out to myself or others in the community who you see here today, and we'd be happy to tell you more about our programs.
Oh, Rabbi, can I also do something? God help me if I forgot. Hey, Ma, are you still on? And and my daughter Sam. How about maybe Jessica and Molly, but Mom.
I was just thinking, I hope Mom made it.
Okay, well, I hope so too. She probably doesn't know how
She's
to.
there. She's right there. Oh, she's muted. Let me see.
Right, she doesn't know how to unmute.
Yeah.
Mom,
We wanted to make sure that she stayed muted, lest she be talking all the way through.
Wait, tell Mom how to unmute where she looks.
On the left, there's a.
Because she probably wants to say something. Oh, well.
Sam said
Hey,
she
Jerry,
can't
can you-
unmute on her phone.
Jerry, can you unmute her? No. All right. Well, Ma, we love you, and glad you were there.
Oh, I see her.
And Sam just said, I can't unmute on my phone, but I'm here and I loved it.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank
I mean,
you
I love
so
doing
much.
it. He was an amazing artist. And so, you know, it's so enriching to learn about so much about somebody that yesterday we didn't know nearly.
Right.
What it makes me think of is the present day with all of the tragedies of many kinds. And I was trying to think of an artist that is doing the same thing, you know, public comment and doing it in a way that people could love. And I just couldn't think of anyone.
And you're right. And the fact is, he was in his day, which is the 30s, 40s, and 50s, recognized as one of the greatest artists of America. Look magazine in 1954 surveyed 68 museums and gallery directors for the top 10 artists in America. And he was right in the middle and with all of the biggies. And then they surveyed all of those 10 artists selected anonymously. And they all selected 6 of the 10, and Shahn again was right in the middle. So from the professionals and the artists. So we don't realize he was enormously popular and important.
Time for a field trip to MoMA, Roosevelt, and Philadelphia Museum.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I'm going to do a Roosevelt piece later in the spring that could be joined by a trip. This mural is extraordinary to see, as is the community. I don't know if Ani is still on with her husband, Bill. She is Edwin Ross and Louise Rostam's daughter, who I visited, and maybe they could help provide a tour if we go. Anyway.
Can't wait till next week.
Okay.
Thank you
Right.
so much.
Everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Hey. Adios.
Adios.
Jerry, thank you for everything.